Okay, so it's 5 o'clock. I'm just going to go ahead and get started. My name's Ina Nguyen. I'm a health educator with Connect OC Coalition and the National Council on Alcoholism and Drug Dependence, Orange County. And I know that it's been a long day for everyone so far, so thank you all for being here and joining us today. We've been here since the sun's out, now the sun's down. And so we're really lucky to have everyone here join us. And I'm just going to give you guys a little brief introduction of Maris. Thank you for being here today and speaking for this session. So in this presentation, Maris will share her story and provide attendees an opportunity to participate in experiential learning with information that focuses on yoga as self-care and offers some practices including breathing techniques and journaling around yogic philosophy. With that being said, Maris Degener equips a lead peer mentor. She was diagnosed with anorexia at age 14, and with the support of her parents in the community, she fully recovered. Mary studies psychology at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and is now passionate about spreading the hopeful message that full recovery is possible. So Mary shares her story of illness, recovery, and life beyond an eating disorder in the documentary I Am Maris, available on Netflix. So yay, I want to welcome Maris to the session.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I so appreciate all of you who've been here all day running this whole online conference. I think it's a really beautiful resource to offer your community, and I'm really grateful to be here. So with all that being said, I'm going to share a PowerPoint. If anything goes wild on your screen, just let me know and we'll figure it out. But let's see. Okay. Oh, it says that Zoom is not letting me share my screen. Let's see. Let's try. There we go. Can you see my screen? Yay, wonderful. Okay. I think we made it through the official required glitch of any online event, so nice to get it out of the way. So my talk today will be about yoga as self-care for mental well-being. And this is going to be part me sharing my story, providing some information, but then I also want to give you all a chance to experience some of these things. And we'll talk more about what that'll look like in a moment. So here's a brief overview. I will introduce myself a little bit. I'll talk about my journey. We'll talk about yoga and pranayama, or yogic breath work. And then we'll have some experiential learning, which is just a really fancy way of saying you're going to try some of this stuff and see how it works for you. So who am I? I'm a yoga student and teacher, but all that really means is that I'm a student who likes talking about what I've learned. I don't really view myself as an authority or an expert on any of this. I'm really just someone who's been really touched by this practice, and I'm in a really blessed position to get to share it with all of you to the best ability I can. I'm a UC Santa Cruz grad where I studied psychology, which were the banana slugs, which is really not an intimidating mascot, but I think it suits me pretty well. I'm a peer mentor, and I'll tell you a little bit more about what that means later. And I'm a newborn sourdough baker, which, like many of you, maybe during COVID, I've had a lot more time at home on my hands. So it turns out baking bread is a very long process and suits being at home all day very well. And also, I am an anorexia survivor, and I want to tell you a little bit more about that. So although today I'm here talking to you all about my struggles with mental health and mental health challenges, I really wasn't always so open about talking about these things. So these pictures you see on the screen, these are very much representative of the image that I was projecting about myself growing up. I grew up in a very small town where I felt very different than a lot of the people I was growing up with. And it was also a community where we just didn't talk openly about mental health. It was very much stigmatized as something that was shameful, or it was framed as this like personal failure about who you were. And so I really didn't identify myself as someone who was struggling with mental health. I had all these ideas in my head about stereotypes, right? I thought people who were depressed were just lazy. I thought people who are anxious were just kind of uptight. I thought people who had eating disorders were just really vain. And so when I started to struggle with things like anxiety and depression and eating disorder, I didn't have those words to articulate what I was experiencing or what I needed to heal. I really didn't see myself in those stereotypes, so I had no idea how to even talk about what I was feeling. So I kept all these secrets inside, right? I was really struggling, but because I was afraid of being viewed as shameful, I just kept it all a great big secret. And the thing about pretty much any secret, particularly mental health secrets, is that the longer you keep them inside, the bigger they become. And so it quickly grew into something that I was just not able to hold on my own. And so during my freshman year of high school, my eating disorder grew into something that was unmanageable by not only myself, but my family alone. So I ended up being hospitalized for anorexia. And this was the point in my life where my family and myself got a crash course on mental health. Eating disorders were not something we talked about at home. And we didn't really talk about our mental health. Feelings were kind of a scary topic for my family. And all of a sudden, that was what our job was. It was to talk about all these things. And it had this added urgency of saving my life. And I think this was the first time that my family and myself were exposed to this idea that our mental health isn't something that's just all up in our heads and something we could just get over if we thought more positively about it. I think it was a wake-up call that mental health is something that impacts everyone's lives to some degree, right? And mental illness or mental health challenges are something that can impact our lives in a way that's more significant than we may even be aware of. So I got to this point in my journey where all of a sudden I had to try a lot of different things to heal. So it started at the hospital, but the thing about going to a hospital for an eating disorder is that all the work isn't done there. Their job is to get your body to a somewhat stable point so that you can go home and really start the hard work. And this started my journey of going to therapy. I ended up trying the practices of yoga and meditation. And although I wish I could say I just went to all of these things and was like enlightened and figured it all out overnight, it really didn't play out that way. These are all practices and things that we have to implement in our day-to-day lives as imperfectly as we can, really, so we can learn from them. And I'm here to talk a little bit more about what that process looks like just a little bit later. By the way, this the picture on the previous slide, that's my actual real life therapist, which I feel like is an interesting thing to include in a public PowerPoint, but she was gracious enough to show up in a film that I ended up making about my eating disorder experience, which, by the way, was a really big, it was kind of a surprise to everyone involved. Originally, the idea was to make like a short 10-minute YouTube video talking about how you could heal from an eating disorder, and that was actually possible. And then we just kind of kept on filming and including more voices, and it ended up on Netflix somehow. And what I took away from this whole experience of telling my story really publicly and as honestly as I could manage is that there's not a lot of hope out there, or at least not a lot of hope that I and many other people are exposed to. Oftentimes the narrative around eating disorders in particular, but many other mental health challenges, is that it's something that will never really get better, that you just kind of learn to manage it or ignore it or just push it aside. And people really resonated with this idea that there actually is hope to have a different level of richness in life, that a lot of the things that arise in the process of healing from a mental health challenge can really transform into strengths. And so I want to talk more about what practices allowed me to reframe things as strengths. And I'm going to frame a lot of this conversation around eating disorders because that's what I have the most lived experience and professional experience with. But I'm going to try and zoom us out as much as possible throughout this process to show how this can be extrapolated, at least to some extent, to many other mental health challenges. So I'm going to start by introducing this idea of a biopsychosocial model of eating disorders. And that's a really big fancy way of saying that eating disorders have many different contributors. And I think there's a way to attribute this lens to lots of other mental health challenges. But I'm going to start by breaking down these different components. So there's a biological component to eating disorders. Things like our genetics, the way our brains are built, the physical effects of food restriction, if that's a part of your particular eating disorder. And this isn't to say that you're born with this prophecy that says you will definitely get an eating disorder if your genetics look like this. It's just to say that some of us have certain temperament traits, have certain elements of our brain that make us more likely to develop an eating disorder. However, this doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? We grow up in a social environment, which is where the social component comes from. So eating disorders and other mental health challenges are impacted by the culture and the society and the messages we get from that society as we grow up. Things like diet and wellness culture that tell us that there's a certain way to exist in the world, one way that's morally desirable, one way that is a moral failure. And that kind of binary thinking that puts folks into boxes can be really stressful on our mental health. Things like fat phobia, discrimination against people in larger bodies definitely plays a role for eating disorders in particular, but all different modalities of oppression, systemic oppression, absolutely play a role in the development of any mental health challenge. Of course, elements in this are things like cultural beauty standards, but also things that impact our ability to access certain resources. Think, for example, how someone with an eating disorder would have their situation compounded by experiencing food insecurity. These are all elements that have to be taken into account beyond just genetics and your brain. And of course, there's the psychological component as well, right? Things like body image, low self-esteem, feeling a lack of control over your life, certain temperament traits like perfectionism, and also, of course, the effects of trauma, which we know can have profound effects on our mental health. And so the reason that I like to present this biopsychosocial model right at the beginning is that I think it goes to show that although that message is sometimes out there, that mental health challenges or mental illness is just all up in your head, it's really entangled in all these different systems of our life and really does show up in very meaningful, profound ways in the many different elements that we show up in the world, which means it's something to be taken seriously. But it also means that there's a lot of different modalities that can be utilized to address these different components of ourselves. And it means there's a lot of hope. So why am I going to focus this talk on yoga? Well, when I was first introduced to the practice of yoga, I was still going through eating disorder treatment. I was at the point where my body was starting to kind of come back online. It was a little bit stronger. It was more able to move with less of the fear that my body would shut back down. And I remember asking my doctor, like, can I move? Can I do anything? Somewhat motivated by the eating disorder that just wanted to like burn calories. And my doctor seeing this was like, you can do gentle yoga. And at the time, I was not aware that yoga is this rich, long-standing tradition with a lot of cultural history to it. I think I thought yoga was Pilates. And so I had this image in my head that I would just be like doing these, ab workouts or something. And I think I kind of rolled my eyes and thought this was really silly, but I was kind of willing to do whatever it took to move. So if yoga was what I was going to get, I was going to take it. And what I ended up falling into somewhat accidentally was a yoga studio that spoke about how yoga is an 8-limbed practice. And so what that means is that these 8 limbs that you can see on the screen here, these all make up the different facets of a yoga practice. So it's not just the physical part, the asana. There's different things like philosophy, things about how we live our day-to-day lives, things about how we can kind of control the mind and focus more mindfully on the world. But the element that I think we're probably going to talk about the most today is pranayama, or the breath. So I'm going to show you this slide that has just a few references to studies done on the impact of yoga and how it's beneficial for folks with anxiety or depression or insomnia. And I don't do this to elevate Western science above the long-standing traditional roots of yoga. I think there's a lot of richness just in that lived experience. But I know that some folks love seeing the science and like seeing this side of it, so I'm going to show it. And so what we know is that yoga has been shown to be extremely beneficial in a lot of ways. We know the side effects of it are fairly limited, really. There's really no side effects to it as long as it's practiced safely and in a way that is surrounded and supported by whatever your care team is. But the research on it is still ongoing. We still have so much to learn, which is why I'm really excited that I used to get to work a lot with this program, this nonprofit called Eat, Breathe, Thrive, which is actually currently studying just how impactful yoga can be for treating eating disorders. And I think one of the most powerful things that has been found in this is the element of agency, the impact of practicing something like yoga that shows us our ability to have a power in our own lives really has an impact on how folks see mental health challenges, but also how they heal from them and end up utilizing a lot of the strengths that come out of that. We're going to talk more about that in a moment. So I think one of the best ways to talk about yoga in this conversation is to discuss some of the fundamental components of it. So we're going to talk about the breath, the pranayama, embodiment, and philosophy. So the breath. We're going to talk about this in more detail in a moment, but some kind of higher level things to keep in mind are that we know that control of the breath calms our central nervous system, which consists of the brain and the spinal cord. We know that breath can inspire mindfulness and presence. We know that it can help decrease stress. So when it calms the central nervous system, right, by controlling the breath, focusing mindfully on it, it helps us move from a state of fight or flight where our adrenaline is really high. Some of you who may have experienced something like anxiety or a panic attack might know that physical, full-bodied feeling of being in that fight mode. And by slowing down the breath and calming the central nervous system, we can move into this rest and digest mode, where our heart rate can slow, our breathing can slow. We might relieve some of those somatic or physiological symptoms of distress or anxiety, whereas our body gets used to that physical sensation of slowing down and being in a calmer state, can really influence the way our mind feels, which can be incredibly powerful. And I think it's important to highlight this because it goes back to that biopsychosocial model in a really special way, right? It's not just something that's an emotion that exists just in our heads. It's something that can impact the way we feel in our bodies. And if there's a modality that can be offered to help us connect to that, I think that can be really profound for helping folks find a self-soothing or a coping mechanism that has almost immediate benefits for the practitioner. Another key element here is embodiment. So we're going to talk about this more, but something to be aware of is this term interoception, which I'll break down, something that is called positive embodiment and mindfulness and presence. So what is interoception? So if some of you are athletes, you might have heard the word proprioception, which is the awareness of how your body interacts with space. So if you're an athlete, it's really helpful to be super aware of how your body moves on the soccer field, things like that. Something that is talked about a little bit less is the concept of interoception. So your interoception is your awareness of the inner state. Things like signals from your body about if you're thirsty, if you need to use the restroom, if you need to eat a snack. Those are all signals from the body, and our interoceptive awareness is our ability to recognize them and figure out what they mean. So something that we know for folks with eating disorders is that they tend to have lowered interoceptive awareness. It is something where it's a little bit more challenging to recognize hunger or fullness signals, or to recognize when you need rest, when you're physically tired. And this could happen in folks who don't have eating disorders, right? I think a lot of our day-to-day world actually encourages suppressing these interoceptive signals, right? If you're running between meetings on Zoom all day and you never get a chance to take a break to use the restroom or grab a snack, it can be harder and harder to recognize what those signals are over time. And so something that we know about the practice of yoga is that the physical practice is very much coupled with the element of mindfulness. So this message is not sent that there is one right way to do a downward dog, or there's not one right way to do a chaturanga. It's really about figuring out how the body wants to move and how you can gently interact with those signals to find the best shape that works for you in that moment. It might change every time you come to your yoga mat. And by going through that practice, every time you practice yoga, you're slowly connecting to those interoceptive skills, right? Oh, I noticed my knee hurt when I did that. What if I lowered it and put a blanket underneath it and it felt better? You're sending this message to your brain that you can listen to the signals it sends you, and you can know in some way how to utilize those signals to take care of yourself. Now, something that I feel like is important to address on this topic of embodiment is the idea of respect versus self-love. So when I first came to the practice of yoga and heard about this idea of interoception, I didn't hear it in those terms at the time, but I just heard it of listen to your body and take care of it. I kind of had this idea that I had to love myself before respecting those bodily signals. Right? I think oftentimes in these conversations about self-care, mental well-being, especially healing from an eating disorder, this term self-love gets thrown around a lot. Like, do this because you love your body. Take care of your body because you love it. And that might work right off the bat for a lot of folks or some folks. For me, it felt kind of inauthentic because, to be honest, at the beginning of this whole journey, I really didn't love myself. I really didn't love my body. And a reframe that was helpful for me was viewing this as respect versus love. Even if I didn't look in the mirror every day and think like, wow, I love my body, it's amazing, I could at least try to practice respect. So respecting my body's signals, respecting the cues it was giving me, and trying to honor whatever messages it was sending. And then we get to move into philosophy. So the thing about yoga is that, again, it has these beyond the physical elements. So it promotes agency and self-efficacy, self-reflection, nonviolence, and service. And we'll talk about a few of these right now. So Seva. Seva is the yogic practice of selfless service. So doing things for others without the expectation of getting anything in return. Why was this important? So when I first started practicing yoga, a requirement of the method of practice I was going through at the studio I was practicing at was that I made a service project. And I remember looking around the room and thinking, like, I thought I came here to do Pilates. Like, I don't understand why I have to do a service project or volunteer. And I was lucky enough to have teachers who were patient with me and explained that yoga is something that prepares us to serve others, right? All this hard work that we're doing to learn how to care for ourselves is really training us to take care of others, to show support for others, to help uplift others. And I found this to be really powerful for me in a few ways. So one, it showed me agency and purpose. And by that, I mean, when I was able to help other people, it showed me that I had the ability to create an impact, not just in other people's lives, but in my own life. I was seeing my ability to create change, to generate things that I wanted to see happen. And that really took away a feeling of powerlessness that I'd felt for a long time. It wasn't a panacea, right? I didn't run a food drive once and all my problems went away, but it was a helpful practice. It was something that gave me a sense of purpose. And I think something that can be incredibly healing is a sense of purpose, right? Being reminded that your presence on this earth is meaningful. It's necessary to this world evolving in a positive direction. I think another thing that I got out of this practice of Seva, although you're supposed to do Seva without the expectation of return, I think I selfishly got some of these lessons out of it. And another one was ebb and flow. So something that happened for me in my journey towards, discovering mental well-being and what that meant for me is that I would get these glimpses of peace or joy or these positive emotions that I hadn't felt in a long time. And I would actually get really scared because I knew I had a sense that they were in some way fleeting. I didn't know how long I would feel happy. I didn't know how long I would feel at peace because I knew now, at least, what it was like to feel that go away or to dissipate. And what I would find myself doing was like strangling the joy out of the moment. Like I would get so scared that I was feeling happy and afraid that it would go away, that it would go away immediately. And the thing about practicing service was that I was seeing the beauty in letting things go, right? When I had an abundance of energy, when I had an abundance of resources, I was able to pass them on and trust that that was a necessary part of the process. And in that, I somehow gained a lesson about my emotions, especially my positive ones. Right? They would come and they would go. And just like the tide of the ocean, that was all part of the natural ebb and flow of being human. Because I think sometimes this message is sent that, recovering from an eating disorder or some other mental health challenge means that you're just happy all the time. Like you figured out all the secrets to life and now you're happy and great. But the reality is mental health means navigating the ebbs and flows and the ups and downs of life and just learning better tools and coping mechanisms to encounter sadness, encounter frustration or anger. And I think that was a powerful lesson out of all of this for me. The final point I got out of this, especially, this philosophical practice of yoga, is that self-care isn't selfish. You might have heard this phrase thrown around a lot. I think I see it like in pretty typography on Instagram a lot, but I think it's true, however corny it might sound. As we are filling our cup, we're better able to pour into other people's cups. And we're really practicing embodying, how we're going to treat other people. Now, one of the first lessons of yoga that I ever learned was the element of ahimsa, which is the practice of nonviolence or compassion. And I remember reading about this concept for the first time and kind of like rolling my eyes and thinking like, yeah, I get nonviolence. Like, don't punch people in the face. I learned that in preschool, whatever. But the more I read it, the more I realized that so much of it is inward, it's inner work. And the tape I was playing in my mind, how I was speaking to myself on a daily basis, was pretty violent. It was pretty rude to myself. It was hurtful. And that's how I was practicing dialoguing with myself. That was also how I was practicing dialoguing with the other people around me. I noticed that when I would get easily frustrated with other people in my life, they were usually judgments that I held about myself. And so part of becoming a more altruistic, a more open-minded member of this society is learning how to have that same compassion and open-mindedness for ourselves. And I think that's what I really love about yoga, is that we're practicing just how to be nicer, how to be better humans. So we're going to move into experiential learning. And I'm really proud of my time management. I wanted to do this at like the 30-minute mark and we just made it. But I'm going to ask you to take a moment and collect some things that you'll need. So one thing that I'm going to ask you to do is find a way that you feel comfortable sitting for a fairly brief period of time. So if you want to go grab a pillow or a blanket that you like sitting on, or if you want to like move onto your bed or your couch and turn your video off, get really comfy, please go ahead and do that. And I also want to encourage you to keep nearby something that you can journal with. It might be like a pen and a piece of paper or a journal you have. Or if there's a different way that feels more accessible to you to kind of like write out or visually express your thoughts or feelings around things, go ahead and grab that and keep it nearby. And while I'm giving you a moment to get settled, I'm going to give you a few tips on sitting comfortably. So there's no one right way to sit. If you prefer to feel supported with like a wall behind you, you can lean up against a wall. You can sit in a chair with a backing. You don't have to sit on the floor cross-legged if that doesn't feel good in your body. And this is one of those first moments where you get to practice positive embodiment, which is a really fancy way of saying feeling good in your body. And I think the first step to that is just giving yourself permission to feel good. You don't have to sit uncomfortably just for the sake of sitting uncomfortably. And I think that leads into the one last caveat I want to give before you get to practice this, which is that I am not your boss. You do not have to do every single thing I say. I'm really just offering suggestions. And if there's anything you can do to take care of yourself during this experience, whether that's choosing to keep your eyes open, taking a break, turning your video off, please take care of yourself any way you need. All right. So the first pranayama or breathwork offering I want to practice with you today is something called square breathing. You might be familiar with it. You might have practiced it before. And we're going to do it fairly briefly, but I've found this breath to be really powerful actually in regulating my own emotions, especially when I feel stressed or anxious. So I'm going to encourage you to find your comfortable seat. And if it feels safe in your body, you can close your eyes down, or you can just look down softly at your lap or your hands, just whatever allows your eyes to feel soft. And if you can, try to find a tall seat, just drawing the crown of your head up towards the ceiling. Maybe relaxing your shoulders down away from your ears. And really allowing your belly to be soft. So your belly button can relax away from the spine. And if this is uncomfortable, if this is maybe a new way to be in your body, you can sit with that discomfort. And take a moment just to notice the natural state of your breath. It might be fast or slow. It might be somewhere in between. Good. Take a deep breath in through your nose. And just exhale out your mouth. Now take a breath in through your nose for the count of 1, 2, 3, 4. Now hold it at the top for a count of 4, 3, 2, 1. Exhale for a count of 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold it at the bottom for a count of 4, 3, 2, 1. Inhale 1, 2, 3, 4. Pause. 4, 3, 2, 1. Exhale 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold it. 4, 3, 2, 1. Start to continue that on your own. If you find that the length of 4 is a little bit long or short, just adjust the count to whatever feels right for you. If you find that you get lost or you just need a moment to breathe more naturally, give yourself that space. And I'm going to let you know when to stop practicing this breath. So there's no need to keep track of time. Just focus on the breath. And the next time you feel even or complete, gently start to return back to your natural state of breath. Your natural state might feel a little slower or calmer, or it might be a little bit faster or uneven if this is a new practice. Whatever you feel is fully welcomed in this space. And take a moment to maybe shake out your hands or shrug your shoulders up and down. Anything to give you a moment to pause. You might have noticed while you were breathing that the way you're sitting could be more comfortable, and give yourself the permission to get more comfortable. You're practicing listening to your body's cues, developing that interoceptive awareness. And in a moment, we're going to practice, maybe learn for the first time, Ujjayi Breath. So Ujjayi Breath is what's known as victorious breath or breath of victory. And it's intentionally really noisy. You're actually supposed to be able to hear it because it kind of drowns out the chatter at the back of the mind. So this is a style of breath that is oftentimes used while practicing physical asana or the physical practice of yoga. So it's a way to really listen to the body, to tune out any chatter where your mind might be saying, that's not the right way to do that pose. I find it to be a really powerful style of breath. So one way that can be helpful to learn this style of breath is to take the palm of your hand and hold it in front of your face. And then you can kind of pretend or envision that your hand is a mirror that you're standing in front of. And you're going to take a deep breath in through your nose. And then you're going to exhale out your mouth like you're fogging a mirror. So you'll feel a bit of constriction at the back of the throat, and it'll make that kind of like Darth Vader-y loud noise. Then you can try breathing in through your nose like you're pulling the fog back off of the mirror. This might be kind of a long, not quite a sniffing sound, but you can hear a bit of drag on the breath in. And the back of your throat might constrict. So it feels a bit like when you're trying to be polite in a meeting and you're stifling a yawn. It's kind of that constriction of the back of the throat. So now you can try exhaling again out through the mouth really loud. And then inhale, pulling the fog back off of the mirror through the nose. And then this time, try to exhale with the mouth closed, so out of the nose, but it still makes that loud, noisy breath. Good. Inhale in through the nose. And exhale out through the nose. And at this point, you might let the palm of the hand fall, maybe let your eyes close. And then try to take a few cycles of that noisy breath. I'm keeping track of time again, so there's no need to count your breaths or keep track of how long you've been breathing. And at first, it might be a little bit easier to make the sound on the breath out. So you might try and focus on making the sound on the breath in as well. Maybe take 2 or 3 more nice deep breaths. When you finish your last breath, just gently releasing any control over it, just returning back to your natural state. This might be a good chance to check in with your body, see how you're feeling. And there's no right or wrong way, right? Some of us might feel calmer or more settled after practicing that breath. Others might feel a bit agitated. Maybe it's a new skill and we're still learning about it. Whatever you feel is okay to feel. Maybe take a moment, shrug your shoulders, maybe take a few shoulder rolls. You might draw one ear towards your shoulder and then one ear to the other shoulder, just kind of stretching the neck. And then we're going to practice one more style of breath. It's called alternate nostril breathing. And this breath was interesting for me to learn at first. It was a little bit tricky for me to grasp. It does look a little bit silly, but I think that's okay. I think it's good to get comfortable with doing sometimes seemingly silly things. And this actually has a really rich history. It's a long practiced breath work. And there's also a lot of research to show that it's very effective for supporting folks with anxiety. So again, you're gonna use your hand as a tool in this. And I like to place these middle two fingers right between my eyebrows on my forehead, so they have somewhere to rest. Then the fingers I'll be using to really facilitate this breath are my thumb and my pinky finger. So my fingers rest. Then I'm gonna use my thumb to seal off my right nostril. I'm using my right hand. My voice is gonna sound a bit funny as I do this. But I'm gonna take a long inhale for the count of 3, just through my left nostril. So 1, 2, 3. I'm gonna use my pinky and I'm gonna seal off my left nostril. So both my nostrils are closed. And I'm just gonna hold that inhale for the count of 3, 2, 1. I'm gonna release my thumb and I'm gonna exhale out through the right nostril for a count of 1, 2, 3. I use my thumb, seal off both nostrils, and I'll just hold it for a count of 1, 2, 3. Now I'll release my pinky. Inhale for a count of 3, 2, 1. Seal it off, hold it at the top. 1, 2, 3. Release the thumb. Exhale. 3, 2, 1. Seal it off with the thumb. Hold it for 1, 2, 3. Release the pinky. Inhale. 3, 2, 1. Seal both nostrils. 1, 2, 3. Release the thumb. Exhale. 3, 2, 1. Seal both nostrils. Hold for 1, 2, 3. Release the pinky and then start to practice the cycle on your own. If you start to get lost or need a break, take care of yourself however way you need to. Sometimes it's helpful to close the eyes. It can allow us to concentrate on what we're feeling. For some of us, closing the eyes doesn't feel particularly safe, so it's also okay to keep the eyes open. While keeping track of times, there's no need to count how many breaths you take. I'll let you know when to pause. The next time your round of breath is completed, just allow your hand to fall away from your face. Let your breath start to return back to neutral. And check in with your body. Notice if there's something that you need, maybe a glass of water, or maybe a stretch. And if your eyes are closed, you can gently flutter them open. And my hope is that starting with the breath allowed you to in some way ground or feel a little bit calmer, but it's okay if it didn't play out that way. But my wish is that as we move into these journaling prompts, that you feel in some way a little bit more connected to your inner state. So take a moment to grab whatever you have near you to journal. It could be a pen, a paper, it could be the notes on your phone, whatever feels good for you. So this first prompt that I'm going to offer to you to just briefly journal, and I'll tell you how long in a moment, is on the yogic philosophy or practice of ahimsa or ahimsa, which is that element of non-harming, of compassion that we talked about a little bit earlier. So your journaling prompt is, in a non-judgmental way, reflect on some ways that you observe yourself living outside of the value of non-harming. How could you implement more kindness into your day? I'm going to set a brief timer, just let your thoughts come out. There's no right way or wrong way. You don't have to write perfect, beautifully crafted sentences. Just take a moment to write down your thoughts on this prompt. If you'd like to just reflect in your mind, that's perfectly okay too. And start to write down your final thoughts. And gently prepare to set aside this prompt just for now. If you find you have a lot more thoughts or things you'd like to write on this, you can always set aside time a little bit later to reflect on it, but I want to move on to another prompt. So this prompt is on interoception, that concept we talked about a little bit earlier about identifying our inner sensations and meeting our needs as our body requests them. So your prompt is to write down 5 physical sensations that you feel in this moment and allow yourself some time to kind of check in with them, and then choose 1 or 2 of these sensations to turn into a promise for self-care. So for example, I feel the sensation of thirst. I promise to get myself a drink of water as soon as possible. And it's okay if identifying 5 sensations is a bit challenging. Just choose 1 or 2 and try this exercise on. Again, I'll be keeping track of time, so just allow yourself to think on the prompt. if you can, start to transition to writing down a promise for at least one of those sensations you've identified. And gently start to close down your final thoughts. You can always return back to this a little bit later. And we'll move along to one more prompt. So this one is on that concept of Seva that we talked about before, and that element of selfless service, practicing acting in a way that cares for others. And so the prompt is to reflect on how self-care empowers you to take action in the world. How does self-care promote your ability to generate the change that you're passionate about seeing? So I'll keep track of time. Go ahead and just start to kind of free write on these ideas. It doesn't have to be perfectly crafted. If it calls to you more to doodle or to in some other way represent your thoughts on this idea, you're more than welcome to do it that way. And gently start writing down your final thoughts or just pausing for now. And you can go ahead and set your pen down or whatever you're using to reflect down, maybe readjust your comfortable seat. And you might find it helpful to kind of shake it out, maybe shake out your hands, shrug your shoulders, kind of bring yourself back into this space. And I know those were rather brief journaling exercises, but I just wanted to give you a taste of how the philosophy of yoga, these different elements of the practice of yoga can inspire a lot of self-study, can really be helpful in this journey. And a lot of the questions that you chew on in this process can be pretty profound. So I wanted to share some recommended resources. And so much of what I've learned are from these folks. So a book that is fairly recent, but I've learned so much from this author over time is Embrace Yoga's Roots by Susanna Barkataki. Beautiful book with a lot of really practical recommendations on practicing all the elements of yoga. A book that was helpful for me in my journey was The Yamas and Niyamas by Deborah Adele. Eat, Breathe, Thrive is that nonprofit organization that I referenced earlier. They're a wonderful organization that I couldn't speak highly enough about. And Yoga to Cope is a nonprofit as well as a podcast that talks about how yoga can be beneficial for folks who are healing from trauma or experiencing mental health challenges. So now I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I think I've left just about 5 minutes for questions or discussions. And yeah, I would love to chat a little bit. Thank you for the nice comments in the chat. I'm glad you felt relaxed.
question. How have you, how has your practice changed, or how have you been taking care of yourself more just this year in COVID and everything?
That's such a good question. I think I thought it would be easier to make time for practicing yoga in COVID. And it actually somehow was harder to like make the space to really intentionally like carve out time, a little place to do yoga. And I think that something that I had to integrate into my self-care routine is this element of flexibility. Like nothing was going to be perfect. I was not going to have a perfectly quiet environment or have a teacher always there to guide me. I think I had to let go of some of that perfectionism around it and just let it show up in whatever dose I could manage.
Oh, I had a question. Hi, Maris. Good to see you again.
Yeah.
Hello. I just want to ask, how has it been being a yoga instructor while also practicing it in your own time? Like, it's like you're guiding people to do that, but then you're also practicing it on your own, like probably in your own time. So how is that experience for you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm actually not currently teaching yoga. I couldn't find a way to do it during quarantine. But I think when I was teaching, multiple classes a week, it was one kind of reframing what practicing yoga meant for me. So even though there were times where I couldn't always do like a 60-minute asana practice, I had to look for ways to just like take a few minutes to breathe in the shower or like do a quick journaling prompt, like literally while I was waiting for lectures to start, in class, right? So I think, again, it was that element of flexibility, but also reminding myself that in being a teacher, I'm really just being a student talking about what they're learning. And if I'm not continuously practicing, I'm not learning anything. So it was like a necessary part of being a teacher and a student and kind of prioritizing it in that way. Oh, I see a question in the chat. If one experiences stress at the workplace or home, how do you recommend practicing the breaths demonstrated? Ooh, that's a good question. So I guess it depends on what your situation is or where you're at. I could imagine that if you're like a barista at Starbucks, it'd be really hard to start practicing like alternate nostril breathing at the counter. So I think whatever feels accessible and comfortable for you. I find myself taking Ujjayi Breath kind of quietly sometimes, to just like regulate my own stress throughout the day. And I'll never forget like being in high school and taking the SATs and hearing my friend next to me Ujjayi breathing because I taught her that skill. So I think that's one you can kind of pull out, it just sounds like you're breathing a little bit louder. Square breathing, I think, can be done pretty silently and is something you could do like in the shower. If that's like a daily part of your routine that you're going to do anyway, you could incorporate it a little bit of mindfulness. Or if you're someone who like cooks a lot, so like if you're standing over the stove and stirring a pot, take a few breaths. I think finding like natural things we do in our day-to-day routine that could in some way have this added layer of mindfulness or breath work could be helpful in some way. I like to release the idea that you have to be like in a cute meditation room with like a cute pillow and like a sea salt lamp, in order to breathe or meditate. Like you can practice it wherever it's accessible for you.
Hey, Maris, I have a question.
Hey, good to see you.
Thank you. So when talking about service, how do you balance the self-care and service? Because I know that often for me, when I'm going to work on things that I'm passionate about, often it makes me anxious, like certain things that I want to see change in the world can kind of like bring out that anxiety. So yeah, how do you balance self-care with service?
That's a good question. And I'll be honest that this is definitely something that I imperfectly practice. Like you get really passionate about something and you can run yourself into the ground working on it, like putting on a conference, you put in a lot of work. And I think that I have to continuously and consciously remind myself that my, ability to generate change in the world is a marathon. Like it's something I want to be doing continuously my entire life. And I cannot sprint full force for a few months or a year and then be out of commission for like 6 months to recover from that. Like ultimately that's just not effective. And I think that appeals to the logical part of my brain that's soothed by that. And so I think, it's all about investment over time. And if I can find a more even balance in my day-to-day and my week-to-week, then I can stay in the game longer over a longer period of time. But I do have to consciously remind myself of that. It can be overwhelming. It can be really stressful to be involved in activism or service. And I think another way to make it a priority is to think about the element of role modeling. Like by taking care of myself, I'm showing others that that's a good thing to do. It's an important thing to do. And that's one way of generating change in and of itself.
All right, guys, thank you so much, Maris, for sharing. That was so relaxing and nice for everyone. So clap, clap for you. We're going to have to be wrapping this up now because our closing remarks, and we have to announce the winners for the leaderboard. So I think it's going to be on this Zoom as well.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Maris.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Wait. Oh, wait. Can you end it?
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay. Now I'm the host. All right. We'll see you all in the final session.